The church bells were supposed to ring for her wedding. Instead, they tolled at her funeral. Her name was Claire Jennings, just 24 years old, a young bride with her whole future laid out like a perfect gown waiting to be worn. But just days before she was set to walk down the aisle, she made a choice that would change everything. She called off the wedding. And within a week, she was dead. The discovery was brutal. Claire's body was found inside her small apartment, a space that only days earlier had been cluttered with bridal magazines, gift boxes, and neatly folded bridesmaid dresses. Now it was a crime scene. The police report described the scene as disturbing, but the neighborhood whispered something darker. Everyone wanted to know who could kill a bride-to-be and why. At her funeral, people cried not only because she was gone, but because of how violently love had betrayed her. The groom, the man she was supposed to marry, sat in the front row, face pale and unreadable. Some whispered sympathy. Others whispered suspicion. Why would a woman cancel her wedding at the very last moment? What secret did she discover that made her say no? And who had enough rage to silence her forever? Days earlier, Claire had been full of doubt. Friends recalled her pacing in her living room, clutching her phone, staring at her engagement ring as if it burned her skin. She was known for her smile, for the way she lit up any room, but that week, her laughter was gone. She looked scared, one friend later said, like she knew something terrible was coming. Her fiancé, Michael, was everything on paper. Successful, charming, the kind of man mothers told their daughters to marry. But those closest to Claire whispered about cracks in the picture-perfect image. Arguments, jealousy, a temper that flared when things didn't go his way. When she called off the wedding, she didn't explain to anyone why. She simply told her parents she couldn't go through with it. And that vague silence left everyone speculating. Because when someone is murdered, silence always has a story. The days after her decision were tense. Claire avoided calls from relatives, ignored texts from bridesmaids, and spent long hours alone in her apartment. The wedding dress she had chosen, a beautiful white satin gown with delicate lace, remained in its box, unopened, like a coffin for a dream. But something else weighed heavier. Neighbors recalled seeing a dark figure outside her building at night. A man pacing near the parking lot. A car idling with headlights off. A shadow watching the window of her second-floor apartment. Claire herself confided to a friend in a late-night text. "I think I made someone angry. I don't feel safe." That was the last message she ever sent. The night of her death, the neighbors heard raised voices from inside her apartment. Some thought it was just another couple's quarrel, nothing out of the ordinary. But when the noise stopped abruptly and the lights went out, silence fell over the complex like a heavy blanket. By morning, Claire was gone. Her death wasn't just a crime, it was a puzzle. A story that forced everyone to question the people closest to her, the secret she carried, and the timing of it all. Because no one believed it was random. Someone wanted her silenced. Someone who knew that with the wedding canceled, the truth was about to spill out. And now, the one question that echoed louder than any church bell was this. Who killed Claire Jennings, and what secret was she about to reveal? Before her name became a headline, before her face was printed on news tickers across the country, Claire Jennings was simply a girl in love. She had grown up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's secrets, or thought they did. Claire was known for her kindness, her easy laugh, and the way she carried herself with quiet grace. Her parents often said she had an old soul, a wisdom beyond her 24 years. Michael Reeves entered her life like a gust of wind that changes the weather. He was confident, well-dressed, and magnetic in a way that made people pay attention when he walked into a room. He worked in finance, drove a sleek black car, and spoke with the assurance of someone who always got what he wanted. At first, their relationship was the kind of love story people envied. He surprised her with flowers at work, left her notes on her windshield, and whisked her away for weekend trips. On social media, they looked like the perfect couple. Pictures of vacations, date nights, and romantic dinners filled her feed. Friends said she glowed whenever Michael was around. But behind the glow, small cracks began to show. It started with little things. Michael didn't like when Claire went out with her girlfriends. He questioned her when she came home late from work. He insisted on knowing who she texted. At first, she brushed it off as protectiveness, maybe even love. But protectiveness, when twisted, often feels like control. Her closest friends noticed the shift. She used to be so carefree, one recalled later. But once Michael was in her life, she always seemed tense. Like she was walking on eggshells. Still, Claire pressed on, determined to make it work. She believed in love, in second chances, in the idea that people could change if you gave them enough reason. And so, when Michael proposed in a candlelit restaurant, dropping to one knee with a sparkling diamond ring, she said yes. For a while it seemed like the fairy tale was back on track. She tried on dresses, flipped through bridal magazines and posted pictures of wedding decorations. Her parents began to plan the ceremony, friends booked flights, and the date was set. It should have been the happiest time of her life. But beneath the surface, the unease never left. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Claire grew quieter. She canceled brunches with friends, avoided long phone calls, and spent hours alone, staring at her engagement ring as if it weighed 100 pounds. One evening, her mother found her sitting on the porch, clutching a mug of tea gone cold. "Cold feet?" her mother teased gently. Claire gave a small smile but didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, "What if I'm making a mistake?" Her mother reached for her hand. Every bride feels nervous. But Claire shook her head. "This feels different. Like, something's not right." She didn't explain further, and her mother, not wanting to pry, let the moment pass. But in hindsight, it was the beginning of the unraveling. Days before the wedding, Claire called off the ceremony. She didn't make a scene. She didn't scream or cry. She simply told her parents in a trembling voice, "I can't do it." When Michael arrived at her apartment to talk, neighbors overheard raised voices through the thin walls. Some described it as pleading, others as anger. No one knew what was said behind closed doors, but the next morning, Michael's car was seen speeding out of the parking lot. Claire meanwhile looked drained. She called her maid of honor and simply said, "It's over. Don't ask me why. Just know I can't marry him." Her voice cracked as if she were carrying a secret too heavy to share. And yet, just days later, she was gone. The cancelled wedding, the silence, the shadows in her life, it all built toward the violent moment that ended her story. But what exactly did Claire know? What truth was she carrying that made her call off the marriage at the very last minute? The answer to that question wouldn't just reveal why she died. It would expose the dangerous truth about the man she almost married. The morning after Claire Jennings was found dead, the town woke up in shock. News traveled fast, faster than grief could settle. Within hours, her picture was plastered across local stations, a bright smile now framed by words like tragedy, murder, and investigation underway. For those who loved her, the words felt surreal. How could someone so full of life one week be gone the next? How could a wedding turn into a wake? Detective Sarah Monroe was the first to step into the crime scene. A seasoned investigator with sharp instincts, she took in the apartment with a practiced eye. To most, it was a place of horror. To her, it was a puzzle. The coffee mug still on the table. The half-packed suitcase in the corner. The untouched wedding dress box in the closet. And then the engagement ring, placed neatly on the kitchen counter. Not lost. Not thrown. Placed. Symbolic, she muttered under her breath. She was done with him. The investigation turned quickly toward the people closest to Claire. In cases like this, detectives know, it's almost always someone the victim knew. Someone they trusted. And who closer than the man she was supposed to marry? Michael Reeves was questioned within 24 hours. He arrived at the station dressed neatly in a pressed shirt, but his eyes were rimmed with fatigue, or was it guilt? His voice wavered between grief and frustration. "She called everything off," he said, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "She wouldn't explain why. I tried to fix things. I loved her. I still love her." Detective Monroe leaned forward. "When was the last time you saw her?" Michael hesitated. "2 nights ago. I went to her apartment. We talked. It got heated, but that's normal when emotions run high. I left. She was alive when I walked out that door." But neighbors told a different story. One woman from across the hall described the fight as scary. "I heard shouting, something slamming against the wall. She sounded afraid." Another neighbor swore they saw Michael's car parked outside long after he claimed to have left. And then there was the text. Claire's maid of honor handed her phone to police, showing them the final message she received from Claire just hours before her death. "If something happens to me, tell them to look at Michael." That single sentence changed everything. Detectives began digging deeper into Michael's past, and what they found painted a troubling picture. Former girlfriends described him as intense, jealous, and manipulative. One ex even claimed he once threatened her when she tried to leave. Friends of Claire admitted they'd been worried for months. She brushed it off, one said, but I think she was scared of him. He had this way of making her feel like she couldn't live without him. Michael, however, denied everything. To the press, he played the part of the grieving fiancé, speaking about their beautiful love story, and insisting that whoever killed Claire would be caught. Cameras captured him wiping tears during interviews, but behind the scenes, detectives weren't convinced. Then came the detail that raised the biggest red flag yet. The night before her death, Claire had called her parents. Her voice shook as she spoke. If anything happens to me, don't let Michael twist the story. It was more than cold feet. It was a warning. The problem was, warnings are useless when no one knows what danger is truly lurking. Detectives now faced a chilling possibility. Claire's murder wasn't random. It wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't a stranger in the night. It was personal. And the man at the center of that possibility was the same man who had once promised to spend forever with her. The evidence was stacking, but nothing yet was conclusive. Michael wasn't just a suspect. He was a man determined to clear his name. He had money. He had influence. And he had secrets he wasn't about to let surface. Detective Monroe stared at his case file late that night, her instincts screaming what logic could not yet prove. This isn't about love, she whispered to herself. This is about control. And with that, she ordered her team to dig deeper. Because if Michael Reeves had skeletons in his closet, it was only a matter of time before one would fall out. The day after Michael Reeves's first police interview, reporters swarmed his driveway. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Michael, did you kill Claire? Why did she call off the wedding? Are you cooperating with police? He raised his hands as if to shield himself, his face carefully painted with grief. I loved Claire, he said firmly. I would never hurt her. The real killer is still out there. The statement made the evening news, but not everyone bought the act. Some saw tears, others saw performance. And behind the closed doors of the precinct, detectives studied his every move. Detective Monroe had seen men like him before. They cried for cameras but clenched their jaws when the spotlight was gone. Men who confused love with ownership. Men who couldn't handle rejection. Watch his eyes, she told her partner, Detective Vega, as they reviewed the interview tapes. He never once says her name. He says, I loved Claire. Past tense. That's not grief, it's calculation. To build their case, detectives began mapping Michael's last days with Claire. Phone records showed a pattern of obsessive calls, dozens in the span of hours, especially after she called off the wedding. When she didn't answer, his texts grew more desperate, more aggressive. One stood out among the rest. You'll regret this if you leave me. That text was timestamped the night before she died. Meanwhile, security cameras from Claire's apartment complex captured Michael's black sedan entering the lot just after 10 p.m. He claimed he left before midnight. But the footage showed the car pulling out closer to 2:17 a.m., hours later than he admitted. Then came the discovery that shifted the investigation. In the dumpster behind Claire's building, a janitor found a torn piece of fabric. It was small, easily overlooked, a scrap of cloth with faint blood stains. Testing later confirmed the blood matched Claire's. And the fabric? It wasn't from any of her clothes. It matched the lining of a man's tailored suit jacket. Detectives remembered what Michael wore to their last meeting. A dark, expensive suit. Got him, Detective Vega muttered, bagging the evidence. But Detective Monroe shook her head. Not yet. This proves he was there, but it doesn't prove what happened inside. Still, it was the first tangible thread tying Michael directly to the crime scene. The more they dug, the more disturbing details emerged. Michael's co-workers described him as charming but short-tempered, a man who smiled in meetings and slammed doors behind closed ones. One assistant admitted she had seen him break a phone in anger when Claire postponed a wedding planning session. An ex-girlfriend, contacted discreetly by police, revealed chilling details. When I tried to end things, he threatened to ruin me. He said, if I can't have you, no one will. I thought he was just angry. No, I believe he meant it. The pattern was clear. Michael's love stories ended in obsession. Back at the precinct, Detective Monroe pinned photos to the evidence board. Claire's engagement ring on the counter. Michael's car in the lot. The threatening text. The bloody fabric. She stepped back, crossing her arms. The web of connections all pointed to one man. But Michael wasn't breaking. In his second interview, he leaned back in his chair, calm and collected. "I know how this looks," he said smoothly, "but you're chasing the wrong lead. Claire had other problems. Maybe someone else wanted her gone." Detective Monroe narrowed her eyes. "Like who?" He shrugged. "I don't know. But it wasn't me." His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled slightly, just enough for Monroe to notice. That night, as detectives pored over the case files, a chilling realization dawned on Monroe. Claire hadn't just been afraid of Michael. She had been preparing for something. Her parents recalled that she started locking her doors obsessively, checking windows twice, even buying a small security camera for her porch. But when police checked that camera, they found it smashed, its memory card missing. The last footage it ever captured was a shadowed figure walking toward her door. The outline of a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. Detective Monroe froze the frame and leaned closer, because the silhouette looked disturbingly like Michael Reeves. The case against Michael Reeves was tightening like a noose, but Detective Monroe knew circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. They needed more, something undeniable, something that revealed who Michael really was when no cameras were around. And that meant digging into his past. At first, Michael's history looked spotless. A clean record, no arrests, a college degree, a stable, well-paying job in finance. To anyone looking casually, he was the perfect man. But Monroe had learned long ago that monsters rarely wear monster faces. They hide in plain sight, smiling in photographs, shaking hands at parties, pretending to be everything they're not. So she went deeper. What she uncovered was a trail of women who had once been charmed by Michael, only to walk away with scars invisible to the world. The first was Rachel Myers, a woman now living 2 states away. She agreed to speak only over the phone. Her voice trembled as she recalled their relationship. At first he was amazing, thoughtful, generous. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. But then he changed. He tracked my location. He went through my phone. He told me what friends I could or couldn't see. Rachel paused before continuing. When I tried to leave, he showed up at my work. He stood in the parking lot for hours. I had to call security. That's when I realized, Michael doesn't accept rejection. Detective Monroe jotted every word. This wasn't just about Claire. This was a pattern. Another woman, Melissa James, had even darker memories. He threatened me, she admitted, her voice flat as if drained of all emotion. He said if I embarrassed him by leaving, I'd regret it. One night, I found my car tires slashed. I couldn't prove it was him, but who else would it be? He wanted me trapped, afraid. Melissa eventually moved across the country to escape him. I didn't tell anyone because I thought people would call me dramatic. But now, hearing about Claire, her voice cracked. She probably saw the side of him I saw too late. With each testimony, the picture sharpened. Michael was a man who charmed, controlled, and punished women who dared defy him. And now, Claire had committed the ultimate defiance. She had called off the wedding. Detective Monroe felt her chest tighten as the realization hit her. Claire's death wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't passion gone wrong. It was premeditated rage. But Monroe needed something physical, something to turn whispers into proof. That proof came from a surprising place. A tech analyst on the team retrieved fragments from Michael's deleted emails. Among them was one draft never sent. It was dated 3 days before Claire's death. The subject line read, "If she leaves me." The body of the message was short, chilling. "Then I'll make sure no one else has her either." It wasn't addressed to anyone. It looked like he typed it, then saved it, an outburst he never sent. But it was there, frozen in time like a confession. Detective Vega stared at the screen. He practically wrote his motive down. Monroe nodded slowly. But juries don't convict on almosts. We need more. Meanwhile, Michael was growing restless. He gave another television interview, this time seated beside his attorney. His suit was crisp, his hair neatly combed. But the cracks were showing. His hands fidgeted. His jaw clenched when reporters pressed too hard. "Did you argue with Claire before she died?" one asked. His lawyer cut in quickly. "My client has cooperated fully. We will not entertain baseless accusations." Michael forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. Cold, calculating, almost daring the world to prove what he'd done. That night, Detective Monroe sat at her desk long after others had gone home. She stared at Claire's smiling photo pinned above the evidence board, the torn fabric in its evidence bag, the haunting text message Claire had sent. There was enough to suspect. Enough to arrest even. But Monroe wanted more than an arrest. She wanted the truth laid bare. Because she knew men like Michael didn't just break once. If he'd killed Claire, he'd left more than one trail behind. And she was about to find it. Detective Monroe believed the key to the case wasn't in what Michael had shown to the world, but in what he had tried to hide. And so, she ordered a deeper forensic sweep of Claire's apartment. Every drawer, every device, every shadow of her final days. What they found made Monroe's blood run cold. Inside Claire's nightstand was a small notebook, its pages filled with hurried writing. Some entries were ordinary, lists of groceries, notes about work. But scattered in between were fragments of fear. Michael showed up again tonight. I told him not to. He gets angry when I don't answer. I'm scared to tell anyone. What if they don't believe me? And then the last entry, dated the very night before her death. He said if I cancel the wedding, it will be the last mistake I make. The notebook was the closest thing to Claire speaking beyond the grave. A haunting record of her terror. A timeline of escalation. Detective Monroe placed the notebook carefully into an evidence bag, her hands trembling despite years of hardened experience. This wasn't just evidence, it was a cry for help that no one had heard in time. Meanwhile, digital forensics uncovered something else. The smashed security camera outside Claire's apartment had given them only a glimpse of Michael's silhouette. But when analysts pulled metadata from the device's damaged memory card, they uncovered a partial recording saved before the destruction. It lasted only 22 seconds. But it was enough. The video showed Michael's figure approaching the door. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicked. He moved with calm certainty as if he knew exactly what he was there to do. When confronted with this evidence, Michael's composure faltered for the first time. This proves nothing, he snapped, his voice louder than before. I went there to talk. That's all. I left. She was alive when I left. Detective Monroe leaned across the table. Then why is the camera broken? Why is her blood on your suit? Why is she dead? Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His lawyer quickly called for an end to the questioning, but the silence that followed was louder than any denial. Outside the interrogation room, Monroe's partner shook his head. We've got him. The notebook, the footage, the fabric. It all lines up. But Monroe wasn't satisfied. She knew men like Michael, calculating, manipulative. He would spin stories, poke holes, and try to turn doubt into freedom. She wanted a nail in the coffin. Something undeniable. And then fate handed her one. Claire's phone had been locked with a passcode no one could crack. For weeks, it had sat in evidence, taunting investigators with the possibility of answers. But now, with new tech, analysts finally broke through. Inside her messages was a hidden folder. And within it, voice memos. The last recording was short, shaky, almost whispered. If anything happens to me, it's Michael. Please believe me. The room went silent as the audio played. Her voice trembled with fear, but it was unmistakably hers. Detective Monroe closed her eyes. It was the confirmation they needed. Claire hadn't just suspected. She knew. Word of the recording spread quickly through the precinct. Some officers sat in stunned silence. Others cursed under their breath. It was one thing to build a case with circumstantial threads. It was another to hear the victim in her own voice, naming her killer before the crime. But Monroe knew they couldn't celebrate yet. Evidence wins trials. Stories win juries. And Michael still had the resources to fight. That night, she reviewed every piece of evidence again. The notebook, the text, the fabric, the footage, and now Claire's final words. Together they painted a picture too clear to ignore. Still, something gnawed at her. Why had Claire called off the wedding so suddenly? Why not weeks earlier, when the red flags first appeared? What had pushed her to take that step just days before the ceremony? The answer, Monroe suspected, was the darkest secret of all. Because sometimes calling off a wedding isn't just about love gone wrong. Sometimes it's about a truth so dangerous, it costs you your life. Detective Monroe couldn't shake the question gnawing at her. Why did Claire cancel the wedding at the very last moment? She had endured Michael's jealousy and control for months. Why draw the line only days before the ceremony? The answer, she believed, lay in the fragments Claire left behind. Her diary spoke of fear but also of discovery. In one entry Claire wrote, "I saw something tonight. I can't unsee it." She didn't describe what. The words cut off mid-sentence as though she couldn't bring herself to put it on paper. Monroe's instincts told her that whatever Claire uncovered wasn't just about Michael's temper. It was about something far darker. The break came when forensics finished analyzing Michael's financial records. On the surface, everything looked legitimate: salary, bonuses, investments. But hidden beneath the glossy numbers was a series of suspicious transfers. Large sums of money moving in and out of shell accounts. Payments to names no one recognized. And one payment in particular caught Monroe's eye: $10,000 transferred only a week before Claire's death. The recipient? An unregistered account traced back to a burner phone. Blackmail? Detective Vega suggested. Or silence, Monroe replied grimly. Digging further, they discovered Claire had withdrawn a small amount of cash days before calling off the wedding. Not for bills. Not for shopping. It was unaccounted for. Monroe pieced it together. Claire had likely stumbled across Michael's secret dealings. Something criminal, something dangerous. And she had tried to protect herself, maybe even pay someone for information. Her cancelled wedding wasn't about fear of marriage. It was about the truth she had unearthed. Meanwhile, Michael's perfect facade was starting to crumble. Friends who had once defended him now came forward with quiet stories. A colleague admitted that Michael had been caught in heated arguments on the phone, his voice sharp and threatening. A neighbor recalled Claire crying in the hallway one night, whispering into her phone, "I think he's into something bad." The puzzle was taking shape. But the most chilling revelation came not from finances, not from witnesses, but from Claire's computer. In her browser history was a series of searches in the days leading up to her death. How to cancel a wedding quickly. Signs of financial fraud. How to hide money from fiancé. And the last search. Can the police protect me from my fiancé? Detective Monroe stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Claire hadn't just been doubting love. She had been preparing for war. Monroe gathered the team. This wasn't just a toxic relationship. She found something she wasn't supposed to find. And she paid for it. The room fell silent. Because if Claire had uncovered Michael's illegal dealings, it wasn't just a domestic tragedy anymore. It was a crime with layers. When Michael was confronted with the financial evidence, his mask cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, voice rising. "Those accounts aren't mine. Anyone could have." "Cut the act," Monroe interrupted, slamming the file on the table. "We have the transfers. We have her notes. We know she found out." For the first time, Michael's composure slipped. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. And for a flicker of a moment, the charming fiancé was gone. What remained was the man Claire had feared, the man who couldn't stand to lose control. That night, Monroe returned to Claire's apartment for one last sweep. She moved slowly, scanning the quiet space, letting instinct guide her. And then she noticed something she had overlooked before: a hidden compartment in the back of Claire's closet. Inside was a small envelope labeled only with one word: insurance. Inside were printed documents, screenshots of Michael's bank transfers, copies of emails, and notes in Claire's handwriting. "If anything happens to me, this is why." Monroe felt a chill crawl down her spine. Claire hadn't just discovered Michael's secrets. She had been preparing to expose him. And someone had killed her before she could. But as damning as the envelope was, it opened a more terrifying possibility. If Michael had killed to protect his secrets, how far would he go to keep them buried? Monroe closed the envelope and whispered to herself, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Because the deeper she dug, the more it became clear. Claire's death wasn't just about love. It was about power, money, and secrets that stretched far beyond a broken engagement. And someone, maybe not just Michael, had every reason to keep those secrets from ever seeing the light of day. The envelope Claire left behind was more than just evidence. It was a map. Each document, each scribbled note, pointed to something bigger than a broken engagement. Detective Monroe spread the papers across her desk like puzzle pieces. Transfers, coded emails, offshore accounts. Michael Reeves wasn't just a jealous fiancé. He was laundering money. The sums were too large, too frequent, and too deliberate to be simple mistakes. Someone with power and reach was behind it. And Claire, bright, curious, unwilling to ignore the truth, had pieced it together. Why hide this? Detective Vega asked, scanning the papers. Monroe's voice was steady. Because she knew it could get her killed. The next step was tracing the shell companies. With help from financial crime experts, detectives discovered Michael's accounts connected to a network of businesses that existed only on paper. Restaurants with no locations. Tech startups with no staff. Each one a mask for dirty money. And then came the chilling detail. One of those companies had ties to a man already on law enforcement's radar. Victor Crane, a businessman with rumored mob connections and a reputation for making problems disappear. Monroe sat back, the weight of it pressing into her chest. If Claire had uncovered not just Michael's temper, but Michael's partnerships, she hadn't just been breaking off a wedding. She had been stepping between a man and his dangerous allies. Claire's parents recalled that in her final days she seemed paranoid. She checked her car before driving. She looked over her shoulder in grocery stores. She even asked her father if the family had a safe deposit box she could use. She was scared of something bigger than just Michael, her father said, his eyes heavy with grief. I think she knew her life was in danger. The picture was coming together. Claire had been preparing not only to leave Michael, but to blow the whistle on his dealings. Her death wasn't just the result of a broken heart, it was a silencing. Detectives confronted Michael with the new evidence, this time about the shell companies. He laughed. Actually laughed. You think you've got it figured out? He said, smirking. You have no idea who you're messing with. Monroe leaned forward. Then why don't you enlighten me? Michael's smirk vanished. His eyes darkened. Because if I do, I won't be the only one in danger. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. Not fear for Claire, not grief. Fear for himself. That exchange shifted the tone of the investigation. If Michael was tied to dangerous men, then Claire's death wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a cover-up. And the terrifying part? If others were involved, then Michael might not have been the one to pull the trigger. Still, Monroe's gut told her he was at the center of it all. He may not have acted alone, but he had set the wheels in motion. The breakthrough came when police obtained security footage from a gas station near Claire's apartment. The night she was killed, Michael's car was spotted there. He wasn't alone. A second man stepped out of the passenger side. The footage was grainy, but the man was tall, broad, with a tattoo snaking down his forearm. Monroe froze the frame. She recognized the tattoo. It matched one of Victor Crane's known associates, a man with a history of violent enforcement. Jesus, Vega muttered. This isn't just a fiancé gone bad. This is organized crime. Suddenly, everything made sense. Claire hadn't just been walking away from Michael. She had been preparing to expose something dangerous. Something that involved money, power, and men who lived in shadows. And in doing so, she had sealed her fate. The tragedy wasn't just that Claire died. It was that she died knowing the truth, but unable to get it into the world before they silenced her. Monroe stared at the evidence board late that night, every photo and document now pointing toward a chilling reality. Michael Reeves wasn't just guilty of murder. He was part of something much larger, something that could still hurt others if left unchecked. And the worst part? If Victor Crane's men had been there that night, then Claire's murder was only the beginning. Detective Monroe knew the case had reached its breaking point. Every new piece of evidence pulled Michael Reeves further from the grieving fiancé he pretended to be, and closer to the man Claire had feared. But now the question wasn't just did Michael kill Claire? It was who else helped him cover it up? The gas station footage confirmed Michael hadn't been alone that night. The man with the snake tattoo was identified as Robert Kane, one of Victor Crane's enforcers. Kane's rap sheet was long: assault, extortion, intimidation. He had walked free from charges more times than Monroe could count, always thanks to witnesses who suddenly changed their story. But this time was different. This time a woman was dead. Detectives pieced together a timeline of Claire's last hours. On the night of her death, she spoke briefly with her maid of honor, her voice tight but calm. "I'm safe," she whispered. "For now." Minutes later, security footage placed Michael's car near her apartment. Two men. One goal. The broken camera outside her door captured Michael's silhouette. Neighbors heard shouting, her voice pleading, his voice sharp. Then silence. By morning, Claire was gone. Monroe stood before her team, the evidence board behind her cluttered with photos, notes, and arrows connecting the tangled web of Michael's lies. "Here's what I think," she said, her tone low but firm. "Claire found out about Michael's financial crimes. She threatened to expose him." Michael panicked. He reached out to Kane to help keep her quiet. But Claire wasn't someone you could scare into submission. She stood her ground. And that's when it turned deadly. Her partner Vega nodded grimly. "Question is, who pulled the trigger?" Monroe clenched her jaw. "Maybe both of them. Maybe one. Doesn't matter. What matters is she's dead because of Michael Reeves." Meanwhile, Michael's once perfect facade was unraveling in public. The same neighbors who once waved politely now whispered behind his back. Former friends turned their phones off when he called. His employer placed him on indefinite leave. Reporters hounded him with sharper questions. "Why were you seen at her apartment the night she died? Who was the man with you? What are your ties to Victor Crane?" For the first time, Michael didn't answer. His silence said more than any denial could. But it was a single fingerprint that drove the final nail into his coffin. Forensics had returned to Claire's apartment for one last sweep. On the broken remains of her security camera, a partial print was lifted. It didn't match Claire. It didn't match Michael. It matched Robert Kane. Now detectives had both men tied to the scene. Michael with his bloody suit. Kane with his fingerprint. And Claire's voice memo naming Michael if anything happened to her. It was enough to move forward. As arrest warrants were prepared, Detective Monroe allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. She thought about Claire, about the courage it must have taken to face down the man she once loved, to stand her ground even when fear pressed against her chest. "Brave girl," she whispered. Braver than he deserved. But bravery alone hadn't saved Claire. She had been outnumbered, cornered by men who saw her not as a person, but as a threat to their secrets. And yet, even in death, she had left behind the truth. Her diary. Her recordings. Her hidden envelope. It was as if she had known this day would come, that her story would be pieced together, one painful fragment at a time. When Michael was finally arrested, the cameras caught every second. The once polished businessman was dragged from his home in handcuffs, his head down, his face pale. Reporters shouted questions, neighbors watched from their porches, and the entire town exhaled as though justice at long last had taken a step forward. But Monroe knew better. Arrests weren't endings. Trials weren't guarantees. And Kane was still out there, a shadow in the system, dangerous as ever. As she looked over the case files one last time that night, a thought gnawed at her. What if Claire's murder wasn't just about Michael losing control? What if it was about shutting her up before she exposed something bigger? Because if that was true, then Michael Reeves might have been guilty of murder, but he wasn't the only monster in the room that night. The trial of Michael Reeves began 8 months after Claire Jennings' death. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, victims' advocates, and grieving family members who wore pins with Claire's smiling face on them. Her story had gripped the community, a young bride silenced before her wedding day, betrayed by the man she trusted most. Michael entered the courtroom in a tailored suit, clean-shaven, his expression carefully composed. But the weight of the evidence followed him like a shadow. Claire's voice memo was played on the opening day. Her words, "If anything happens to me, it's Michael. Please believe me," echoed through the silent chamber. Some jurors looked away. Others clenched their fists. Claire wasn't there to testify, but in that moment, her voice carried louder than any witness could. Witness after witness painted the same picture. A man obsessed with control. Former girlfriends described his temper. Neighbors recalled fights. Friends admitted Claire had confided her fear. Then came the forensic evidence. The bloody fabric from his suit. The video of his silhouette. The financial records she had uncovered. And finally, the fingerprint of Robert Kane on her broken camera, tying Michael to men who used violence like currency. Michael's attorney argued desperation. He was heartbroken. He went there to reconcile, not to kill. But the jury had heard enough. His mask was gone, stripped away by Claire's courage and the trail she left behind. Claire's parents took the stand near the end. Her mother's voice cracked as she described helping Claire pick out her wedding dress, never imagining it would become a symbol of tragedy instead of celebration. "She was my only daughter," she said, gripping the railing. "She deserved a life, a future, love that didn't hurt. Instead, she got Michael." The jury's faces were unreadable, but the air in the courtroom was heavy. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy. Michael Reeves showed little reaction as the words fell. No tears, no outbursts, only a clenched jaw as though anger still burned hotter than regret. For Claire's family it was justice but never enough. No sentence could bring back the daughter, the sister, the friend they had lost. And yet, a shadow lingered. Robert Kane was never caught. Despite the fingerprint, despite the evidence tying him to Michael, he disappeared. Some said Crane's network had buried him. Others whispered he was still out there, watching, waiting. For Detective Monroe, that was the bitter taste of the case. They had caged one monster, but another had slipped through their fingers. Still, she took solace in one truth: Claire Jennings had not been silenced. Even in death, she had spoken loudly enough to see justice carried out. Months later, Monroe visited Claire's grave. The air was quiet, the cemetery still. A single white rose rested against the headstone, left by someone before her. She stood there for a long moment, her hands in her coat pockets, the weight of the case still pressing against her heart. "She fought harder than most," she whispered. "And in the end she made sure the world knew who you really were." Walking away, Monroe thought about all the other Claires in the world. Women who loved men who turned into monsters, who ignored red flags until it was too late, who never left behind the kind of evidence Claire had. And she asked herself the same question she had asked at the beginning: how many others were out there right now, living the same story, waiting for the same ending? That is the cruelty of these tragedies. They are not just about one life lost, one wedding turned to a funeral. They are warnings, echoes across time. Claire Jennings' story is more than a crime. It is a mirror held up to the world, asking us, when love turns into possession, when devotion turns into control, how many warnings will we ignore before another life is taken? Claire's story is not just her story. It's a warning, a reminder that love should never cost you your freedom and certainly never your life. If her voice moved you, if her courage shook you, don't let her be forgotten. Like this video so her story reaches more people. Share it so others hear her warning. And subscribe to this channel for more true crime documentaries that give a voice to those who no longer have one. Because every story like Claire's carries a question we cannot ignore. How many more will it take before we finally learn to listen?